It's been 10 years since Kendrick dropped To Pimp A Butterfly, a genre-bending, rule-breaking classic, and in my opinion, the best album of all time.
Yeah, I went over to the studio and he played me a lot of the album, and I'm just like, wow, this is incredible.
Masterpiece, classic, kind of dope to just hear it today, knowing how far Kendrick has come.
That whole album is awesome. You know, it's the first album of its kind.
Arguably one of the greatest hip-hop records of all time.
And the Grammy goes to Pimp A Butterfly, Kendrick Lamar.
And I figured there's no better time to dive into how the album came together. The creative process, studio stories, and production techniques that you can take into your own beats. But before we get into the technical side, it's worth looking about how this project even came to be, because this isn't just any other hip-hop album. So To Pimp A Butterfly dropped in March 2015, and it's a sprawling 80-minute journey through soul, jazz, funk, gospel, and poetry, all woven into the framework of hip-hop.
The style of music that he's doing. I'm hearing the funk, I'm hearing the jazz, I'm hearing the avant-garde. You know, I'm hearing everything but what I hear on the radio.
And coming off the back of Good Kid, Mad City, Kendrick could have easily just played it safe. That album gave him platinum records and critical acclaim, and it was the kind of moment that most artists would just double down on. But Kendrick wasn't interested in repeating himself.
I think my excitement in doing music is me feeling like I'm never stagnant, me feeling like I didn't get comfortable in you know, my own skin of what I think is good.
He wanted to grow, to challenge himself, to build something that didn't fit the mold of a typical rap record. And that meant starting from scratch, both sonically and conceptually.
I knew from the jump that there was gonna be a challenge, you know, from my listeners' ear. But if I'm challenging myself in the studio, I want to challenge you as well.
And once that vision clicked, he went all in. A turning point came during a trip to South Africa.
Having that visit to South Africa, it really not only catapulted that album, but just my experience as a human.
And that shift in perspective even played a role in how the album was ultimately framed. And the core of the album came together at No Excuses studio in LA, which was Dre's old studio. Kendrick was working closely with his longtime engineer, MixedByAli, plus a tight-knit crew of musicians and producers, which included Terrace Martin, Soundwave, Raki, and Thundercat, among others. And this wasn't a send me a beat situation. They were building tracks live, jamming, arranging, experimenting. Kendrick would mumble melodies, the band would play around, and then the lyrics would come when the music was already alive. And although they did use samples throughout, what's wild is actually how few were used. Most of it feels sampled. The tones, the textures, the grooves, but most of it was played in and arranged live. And Terrace Martin even brought in full jazz bands, recording upright bass, horns, and drums with vintage gear. Likewise, the mix was mostly done using outboard gear, and Ali mixed that using an SSL console, then printing that to half-inch tape for that warm, analog feel that Kendrick wanted.
It's a product of an artist trusting their engineer, right? If it wasn't for Kendrick being like, yo, just try something crazy, just do something different, right? I'm gonna leave for a few hours, just have fun.
Even the emotion was treated like performance art. On You, Kendrick turned down all of the lights in the booth, pacing in the dark, literally crying and screaming into the mic. This wasn't made like a typical album. It was more like a film or a stage play, put together scene by scene. Right, that's enough about the backstory of the album. Let's unpack the techniques and choices that gave this album its sound, and also how you can use those in your own music. So I wanted to highlight a few techniques and ideas you can take from To Pimp A Butterfly as a producer. Some are more technical, some more mindset-based, but all of them are super useful. First up, let's take a look at the track Complexion.
Let me talk my Stu Scott. Excuse me on my Tupac. Keep your head up, when did you stop?
And on this track, Terrace Martin brought in Robert Glasper to play some keys. And Glasper ended up improvising for a few minutes at the end of the song.
Basically, every song, he'll pull it up and be like, listen to it. I would listen to it, I would learn it, and then I would do a pass. He'll be like, play whatever you want, whatever you hear. When Complexions came on, I played to it, and then it stopped, but I kept going. And I was kind of changing the voicings of the chords a little bit, and, you know, just kept going with the vibe, and I kept it going for another 4 minutes.
And that off-the-cuff improv ended up being a whole new section on the song. And it's actually the part that Rhapsody ended up writing to. So as a producer, I'd say Logic's my main instrument, but I can play a little bit guitar, bass, and keys. So when I want to tap into that same kind of freedom, I'll just hit record, and then just improvise for 5-10 minutes. No pressure, no overthinking. I'll then go back, listen through everything, and pick out the moments that stick out to me. And this is what I ended up with. it started as a loose idea, but when you start cutting and shaping it, it can turn into something really nice. And honestly, don't worry if you're not a session level player, because I am most definitely not. It's not about being perfect, it's just about that improvisation process. And if you give yourself enough space to explore, eventually you're going to land on something that you really like. Right, next I want to talk about the track Mama.
This feeling is unmatched. This feeling is brought to you by adrenaline and good rap. Black penalty, bar cap. West.
Produced by the legend Knowledge. And this one's less about production techniques and more just about getting your music out there. And the wild part about this track is the instrumental had already been out for a while before Kendrick even heard it. And it was originally released on Knowledge's anthology beat tape back in 2013. And the way Kendrick found it was even more unexpected. He was doing a photo shoot for Complex with photographer Eric Coleman, and Eric was playing the anthology tape in the background. Kendrick instantly heard the beat and needed to know who made it. And then a year and a half later, Kendrick's team phoned Knowledge and told him it was going to be on the album. And this is why I think it's so important to not just sit on your music and actually release it. Even if it's rough, even if no one's listening yet, you never know who might hear it or where it could end up. One of the foundations of To Pimp A Butterfly is its harmonic richness. Those lush, soulful chords that feel like D'Angelo meeting Miles Davis. From those walls to How Much a Dollar Cost, the album is packed full of jazz-rooted progressions. But even if you're not a theory whiz, you can still tap into that sound. Like I said earlier, I can play a little bit of keys, but sometimes it's nice to get a helping hand. And for that I use a free plugin called Ripchord, which lets you trigger complex chords with single keys. And there's loads of free packs for that online, but I especially recommend Musician's Paradise's Patreon. It's full of jazz, soul, and R&B chords that will instantly give you that To Pimp A Butterfly vibe. And the track I was noodling over earlier actually started with a progression from Ripchord. And once you've got something that you like, you can record it as MIDI and then tweak it. Change the notes, adjust voicings, and add your own top-line melodies. And here's how that final progression turned out. For this next one, I want to focus on using samples to elevate your beats. Not just dropping loops in, but really shaping them. So on this track, I already had a solid foundation: drums, bass, guitar, and keys. But I still felt like it needed something else to elevate it. And that's something To Pimp A Butterfly leans on a lot: live horns. And in a perfect world, I'd hit up a friend that plays horns, but sometimes that isn't possible. So instead, I grabbed a horn sample from this AN Sound sample pack. And here's what it sounded like originally. Then I chopped it, pitched it, and stretched it to really fit with the groove of the track. And the point I'm trying to make here is don't just plop a loop on top of your beat. Treat your samples like a musician would treat a part. Shape them so they really fit with your beat. Right, tip 5 is really simple. Just play your drums in by hand. Don't quantize everything. And for these drums, I use Addictive Drums, and in particular, Mai's amazing drum kits. If you haven't checked them out before, honestly, go and do it now. So just listen to these two loops. The first one is fully quantized and locked to the grid. And this second one is played in by hand, loose and completely unquantized. And that first one is technically perfect, but it's completely lifeless. There's no groove, no feel, and it doesn't make you feel anything at all. And To Pimp A Butterfly thrives off human energy, real-time playing, subtle imperfections that push and pull. So whenever you can, just turn off the quantize and play what you can in by hand. Right, for the final tip, we're going to look at the mixing on this album. And just like all of Kendrick's other projects, this one was mixed by his longtime collaborator, MixedByAli. And one of his signature approaches is to start every mix in mono.
And the reason why I mix in mono, I say all the time, mixing in mono is mixing with one speaker up front, is because, you know, Kendrick helped me with this also, but because like I use a lot of effects and reverbs and stereo imaging where, you know, sounds are coming from left and right of the speaker. when I'm mixing mono on one speaker, I'm able to gauge things up and down instead of left and right. So I'm able to get a different type of clarity. I'm able to just really see the depth in a song without actually having to, listen to it.
And the thinking behind this is, if your mix sounds clean and balanced with no stereo width, then when you finally flip it to stereo, it'll sound even wider. And if you want to try it out, it's really easy. In Logic, just grab the stock gain plugin, put it on the master, and hit the mono switch. And now you can easily A/B between mono and stereo and see how your mix is stacking up. Now, I'm not saying this is something everyone should do, and to be honest, I actually don't do it often myself. But it's a great exercise, especially if you're struggling with muddy mixes or if you've got clashing elements in there. Like everything in production, it's a tool for you to try out and just see if it sharpens up your mixes. To Pimp a Butterfly isn't just one of the greatest albums of all time, it's also a masterclass in production. And hopefully some of these ideas spark something for your own music. However, if you're looking for inspiration to start your next beat, you can check out my sample packs, Soul Food and Secret Sauce. And both of those got 50% off for the next week if you use the code OHIGHMARCH. Plus you can also grab my free pack if you haven't done already. And I've also started a Discord server where you can connect with other producers, share your work, collaborate, and just come and chat about music. And I'd love to see some of you guys there. If you want to check any of those out, all of the links are in the description.